Welcome back to the Fit Nerd, and today I'm actually excited. I've got Brian Cox here from VF Research or FutureVision Research, vfresearch.com. He manufactures FujiNets, not just the Atari that, of course, I'm in love with, but all the available ones. And so in today's video, I'm going to use Brian's expertise to show me not only the FujiNets and not only how you manufacture them yourself to get them out to the community, but we're gonna pop back here and check each one. We've got the CoCo, and this might be the first time, at least in a long time, that I've actually touched an Atom. It's real, right?
It's real, and it's a substantial computer.
Yeah. Where's the printer?
The printer is somewhere else. That's still a thing.
If you know, you know, right? So we're going to go over the FujiNets. We're going to make this an all-inclusive as of this time. We're like December 2024. This isn't Christmas related, but it's just the FujiNets, they're moving along for different systems, and we're going to find out where they all are right now. Okay, so first things first, FV as in FutureVision Research.
Right.
Not where I say it wrong. FVresearch.com or FutureVision Research is the full company name.
Right.
So let's do the Atari first.
Awesome.
We've got Atari, and then we're going to do Apple II line, right?
Yes.
And then we're going to do, you wanted to do the...
Then we'll do the Atom.
The Atom after that. And those three are in full production swing.
Right.
And there are tweaks that happen, and things are evolving still, but there's a pretty set standard for how to make those three. And then we'll go into the CoCo FujiNet for the Tandy TRS-80 Color Computer, whatever you want to call it. And that one's available, but the designs they're really in flux right now.
Right.
And this happens with a lot of the FujiNets as they're expanded out, and they're like, let's tweak it and make it better.
Right, exactly.
And then we'll touch base on the Commodore FujiNet or the Meatloaf project, just to cover that other FujiNet. And then anything else that people have heard about FujiNets are really just in real early design changes, right? Or design considerations for those.
There's others that have had their bring up, which is, as Thomas Cherry Holmes refers, when they start to, okay, we have a system, let's get to work on development. But until we see that they have a circuit board design and they've started to customize the firmware, then I leave those alone, but there's still people working on them at certain levels.
So certain hobbyists could go ahead and make like a FujiNet for the Atari 2600 now. If they wanted to dive in that deep, you can get that and make it. But from a manufacturing standpoint, because you need to make them in higher volumes, not just a labor of love for 4 hours in the studio. You need to you need to make 10 of them in 4 hours or 1 hour or less, right? To make it worth your time to do it. Because everybody would just love to do this stuff for the love of it, but you've got to pay for the parts and everything.
Right, yes. And they make them affordable for you all to go out and purchase one of them.
Okay, so let's start with the Atari.
So this would be the Atari FujiNet, and this is designed for the 8-bit line. So that even starts from the original Atari 400 and 800 without any letters after it. But then the XLs and even into the XEs, so all of the 8 bits. And what's really neat with this one is it works off of the serial I/O, or the serial input-output port. And it allows a pass-through as well. So you can plug this in to your Atari, which I know we're going to show later, and you can continue on to floppies or other peripherals, floppy drives that you might have.
Now, from my experience, there's a good chance most Atari 8-bit users out there won't plug anything else in.
That's true.
You don't need to. Unless you're trying to read off some old floppies or you want to play with your cassette drive. But even printer-wise, you can print to PDF.
Yes.
Well, this shows up as a printer and you select that.
Right.
And we'll show that. We're going to talk about these and how Brian's making them. And then we're going to pop back here and actually plug it in and try it out. But we'll find that there's a setup menu you can access over your local Wi-Fi to set for the printers and other things on it. It's pretty good, pretty cool, good stuff.
does.
So when you're making these, each one you make different, right?
For the different platforms?
Right.
Exactly. They each have their own circuit board design. So this is a fully populated Atari 8-bit FujiNet. And by populated, I mean all of the parts have been installed and soldered on.
Oh, okay. You haven't cracked the edges of this board
Exactly.
off. Okay. I'm like, that looks bigger.
Yes, you're right.
That is not going to fit in this case.
Right.
But these all come off. Okay.
Those are V-scored by the manufacturer. And so what's nice is I keep these on. The manufacturer builds the boards like this so that when it mounts into their pick and place, where it actually picks up the parts and orients everything, and then they do their soldering through the oven, these stay so that it can move through that process in a uniform fashion. And then I keep it because I have to solder all of the pins on to all of these for the SIOs. And so if I just switch over to this, we'll take one apart for a moment, and I can show you, we 3D print these parts for the case, but then the actual pins have to be soldered.
Right, and those are pretty hefty pins.
Yes, they are. And this is what's wonderful with the team. Whenever they are developing one, they hunt down the pins that will actually recreate these connectors that you can't get anymore.
Right, because there was again, the FujiNets are evolving. And what version would you call this Atari FujiNet?
This would be 1.7.1 as far as the hardware goes.
So if I remember right, I think it was version 1.5. The pins are too small. And
that was before.
Yeah, and it was hard for it to stay in on the pass through, right? Right. Yes. It was hard for things to stay in because they looked like good sized pins, but once you got all that plastic in there, the filament and all for the 3D case, it just didn't work right.
Yes.
And the FujiNet, if you have one, it still works fine. I've got one somewhere here and still use it. But they're learning and they evolved with this, which is from my perspective, would be a problem for manufacturing because you don't want to get 100 of these in and find out by the time you're working on the 56th one that they've designed something to make it better. Exactly. Because you want to sell the better stuff, right?
Well, not only that, I invest in my time in determining what the best manufacturing process is. And if we make a circuit board change, that means I have to go back to the manufacturer and correct the layout as well. So,
right, and get them up to date.
Right.
So now when you say manufacturer,
yes,
you are a manufacturer of these, and then you have a sub-manufacturer.
Exactly.
So instead of you doing every single thing in-house, you've subbed some of that out to get this board in, right?
Exactly.
So you get this board in, and then you take it and you turn it into this board. I can see, obviously you add the pins on this side, and here's your handiwork for the pins on the other side. Right. Well, these aren't pins, right?
Yeah, sockets.
Yeah, sockets.
Suppose, or a plug.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I see everything else is on there, the switch and so forth.
Right.
Okay.
With surface mount, I can do the surface mount parts, but it's time. Anyone who's done surface mount knows, you too, right? It's time consuming. And so if I have to, then I will. And in fact, when I first ordered up everything for the Ataris, that was my thinking. Like, I have access to an oven for surface mount. I'll go ahead and make these myself. And then I realized the small form factor that they used for the surface mount parts. Yeah. Because the components like transistors and such will come in different sizes. And they used one of the smallest I've ever seen. So I decided I would be better off using someone who can production manufacture the surface mount part, and then anything that's through hole soldering, then I hand solder myself.
Cool.
So it's a combination.
So you have a pigtail on the CoCo one?
Yes.
I just want to show this for people, for example. We're not going to talk about the CoCo yet, but for example, okay, here's the CoCo FujiNet, and here's a pretty standard cable that you get and you use, and we'll talk about later, they're going to try to eliminate the need for this cable.
Right.
But what I want to point out is this is a pretty standard DIN connector that you can order and get. You can't order and get these SIO sockets.
Exactly.
Yeah, Atari came up with this socket design, and then nobody else really ever used it. It's a great design. I love the connector.
Yes.
But this wasn't like Serial or Centronics or anything else where, the Commodore or IBM PC Junior used it for this or that, and you can kind of get them that way. You have to hand make, solder this on, and then 3D print the shroud here for the connector, and then this one as well to go into the Atari. These are all 3D printed parts.
Exactly.
That you then have to fit. How many times do you get this wrong? This has to fit
yes,
into
fortunately,
there.
it's still like a DB25 where it's a smaller one roll the other. So as long as I'm paying attention.
So that's one thing I love about the maker community, which has gotten even bigger than just calling it a maker community, is we're able to get some parts and then 3D print the other parts and figure out how we're making this SAO connector, in this case specifically for the Atari 8-bit line. So that's pretty cool. Okay, let me hand you that back.
Put that back there.
Before we go demonstrate this, is there anything further to cover in here I've forgotten about?
One thing I might just point out is it does have indicator LEDs, and so the case has those pass-through. So there's 3 LEDs, one to indicate a Wi-Fi connection, one to indicate that there's traffic on that serial, and then one for Bluetooth. Bluetooth isn't really used yet, as far as I'm aware, across any of them, but it's there and it's ready.
Yeah. Something I wanted to, we'll cover on this because you, over the past year, well, how'd you get to this point to make and sell FujiNets?
So I actually met Thomas Cherry Holmes at your event back in February.
Right, the Vintage Computer Festival SoCal.
Yes, SoCal.
That we had in
annual.
February 2024, this past year. And we got, the next one's coming up in 2 months.
Perfect.
Which is great because I'm going to rope Brian into bringing as many FujiNets as he can to sell. Because Thomas Cherry Holmes is going to be at VCF SoCal 2025, Orange, California. Look it up, vcfsocal.com, right? Well, there'll be links somewhere.
Excellent.
And Thomas is going to be back to show them, and you met him there last year.
I did, and met him, and then after hearing his talks, I was already aware of FujiNet as far as the Atari was going, but I didn't know that there were so many other platforms ready to go. And when I found that they've been looking for other manufacturers, I jumped right in. That was right at my alley. So I ramped up.
And what was your alley?
My alley is making circuit boards and learn to solder kits, and then actually educational kits as well. So I was already well versed in manufacturing circuit boards. Not only manufacturing, but then of course soldering and building them.
So you're already in that space, and then you found this fun process to go ahead and make these. It's right in your wheelhouse.
Yes.
And then it sounds like the what really pushed you was personally talking to Thomas Cherry Holmes.
Exactly right.
Cool.
Yes. Very much inspired me to join that team.
Cool. Okay. So let's go ahead and check out the Atari FujiNet back here.
Okay,
and then after that, we'll be back with the Apple FujiNet. So let's check that out.
Okay. Okay, so let's go ahead and hook up the FujiNet to the Atari 800 XL. And right here with our Atari, we're going to connect it into the SIO port. And the thing to remember with these 3D printed connections, sometimes it does take a little bit of finesse to connect them. So I'm just going to reach back here behind, and what we want to do is use the angle of the FujiNet itself and just gently rotate it back and forth to insert it into place. And let me move this back so you can see. This is what the FujiNet will look like once it's installed into the SIO port on the Atari computer. Now that it's plugged in, of course, I'll make sure the little power switch is hooked up or powered up, and we'll start up the Atari. Now, because this FujiNet, we've been testing with it, it's actually already connected to the Wi-Fi. So that's the first thing I want to show you. Down at the bottom, we have some tooltips, and we have C for config. That will actually give us the Wi-Fi settings. So I'm going to hit C, and you can see we're connected to Wi-Fi. This is the host name and the actual IP address. The IP address is actually very useful because we can actually talk to the FujiNet from a modern computer's browser to view a bunch of different settings. We'll take a look at that in a moment. But now that we've seen this screen, I'm just going to hit any key so that we go back to the actual host list and drive slots. On the top, we have a list of where we can load files from. Top is the SD card, and then we have some built-in TNFS servers. These are actually over the internet that will allow you to load certain files. We're going to take a look at errata. Once you go in and browse, you find a file, you can mount it into a drive letter, And you see we were doing some testing, so we actually had an Atari DOS loaded into the first drive slot. Notice you can have up to 8 drives connected. So let's go ahead and go into one of the TNFS servers and load up a program. I'm going to use the arrow keys and we'll come down to atari-apps.errata online, which is right here under slot 4. I'll press return, and now we're actually getting a list of files over the internet. Since we're on an Atari 8-bit, we'll go down to the Atari 8-bit folder, press return again, and we start to have a new list of folders. From here, we'll go down to the internet folder, return one more time, and then we have a list of files. The one that we're after right now is going to be ISS. This is actually going to get live information about where the International Space Station is in orbit and then plot it onto a map for us. Once we're here, we have the file selected, we'll press return so that we can actually load it into a drive slot. So I'll press return. And although we have something loaded in the first slot, that's no problem. I'll just hit 1 to confirm that's where I want it. And since it's on slot 1, I should say, it's there, and I'll press return. You can have it read only or read write. This is useful if you're saving files. Let's say you're editing a basic program and you'd like to update the file that you're creating or modifying. You can have read write possibilities, but we're just going to do read only. So I'll press return.
And I wanted to point out, this is a public server. Anybody who has a FujiNet or gets one can go here and do this, but also everybody else is accessing these, so it's always best courtesy to only do read, because otherwise sometimes you can tie up the file in a write mode when you didn't mean to, and then other people can't access it.
Yes,
maybe not the ISS app, but there are other apps. Sometimes I've heard those things happen.
Gotcha. That makes sense. And by the way, if you go to FujiNet.online, you can see a list of the known TNFS servers and even see their status about if they're actually up or down at any given time too. Now that we're loaded a file into the first drive slot, then I'm actually going to hit the escape key. So we go back to the host list, and I like to always confirm that I have a file loaded and that it's the proper file. So you can see in drive slot 1, it's read only, and it's the iss.xex, xex being one of the Atari extensions that you'll notice. Now that we're here, we have the file ready to go, then I can actually just hit the option key, which is unique, right, for the Ataris. I can hit option, and it's going to restart the Atari and then boot into that drive letter. So we'll give it a moment so you can see it's actually loading up.
And so it's downloading it from the internet right now.
Right, exactly. That's true. It's actually loading the actual program file over the internet while it's launching it.
Onto a 40-year-old computer.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so here we have it, International Space Station Tracker. And we can press any key, and I'll just hit the space bar. So
we got to mention Bill Kendrick, of course,
yes,
who, again, these are labors of love. He wrote this, works with it, and that's one of the great things. 40-year-old computer, new technology, new software.
Right, I agree. And so what's actually happening is this is an example of how FujiNet can be a JSON parser. So it's actually bringing in the JSON data and then plotting it for us on a map here. And Bill even added the feature with this Atari version where we could hit P and then see a list of the people who are in space right now. And so we could either go through the list or we could press
hadn't seen that feature yet.
Yeah, that one I think is fairly new. So I'll hit escape, and now we'll just replot the screen.
Nice. Have you ever seen the ISS fly over your head?
I have, yes.
Me too.
We used the
pretty
tracker
cool.
program.
Yep.
Not the FujiNet, not quite the resolution we need
Right.
to see that.
But at least we know we shouldn't bother to go out and look.
Right. Yes, very true, since it's
over
very far away.
Is it literally over North Korea right now?
I wonder. Actually, I think it's a little bit farther.
Yeah, okay.
So we'll go ahead and if I hit escape here, then you'll notice what happens is escape key is different behavior, I find, depending on what platform we're on. But if I hit escape here, I would expect it to load back into the FujiNet menu. So let's see what happens. Okay, nope, all it did was restart it. So I find really after you've loaded a program, you've played your game or tracked your International Space Station, I like to just power off the computer and then power it back up. And then we would expect it to come back into the FujiNet menu.
Nice.
And so here we go into the FujiNet menu. It already remembered the Wi-Fi connection that we used before. So here we are ready to go. And you'll notice that it remembers what you had mounted in drive slot 1. So that's there ready to go. If you wanted to edit your drive slots, you can actually do that from this screen. And you'll notice that we have E for edit. Watch out though, because that's for editing the host list here of locations you can obtain files. If you hit the tab key, then that will move your cursor down to the drive slots. And then you can actually edit these slots. And what I'll do is I'll hit eject over 1, and then that'll clear drive slot 1 so it's empty. Now, the other thing I wanted to be sure to share with you is how much you can actually view and edit from a regular browser computer. And I guess what I'd say is a modern computer. Remember, by hitting C for config, I can actually bring up the IP address that's been assigned to the FujiNet. So let's go over to my laptop screen. And from my laptop screen, now I'll go ahead and hit refresh because I was testing this just so I can make sure that we're getting a valid connection. And you're noticing that we're just hitting the straight IP address, 192.168, etc. But this menu is common for all of the FujiNets. So they literally have a web server running on the FujiNet, on the ESP32, that gives us all this information. We won't go too deep into this, but notice that you can see all the network details, including, of course, its IP address and what Wi-Fi connection we have. Over on the right-hand side here at the top, then our particulars on the hardware, and that would be the FujiNet hardware itself. You can even reboot or reset your FujiNet right here. Coming on down here, notice that just like we had the menu on the FujiNet itself, we can see the host list. By the way, I hadn't mentioned it yet, but remember the top slot is the SD card reader, so we could actually load and boot files right off of the SD card. But again, and you can edit these as well. If you click on one of these slots, then it'll actually allow you to edit it. And I say that, and now it hasn't. It locked up.
Well, it looks like you connected to the FuNet. Oh, there we go, FujiNet. Okay.
Yeah, so I hit.
Maybe that's an Easter
F5.
egg.
Yeah, that's an Easter egg. Well, that's interesting. I don't know why I did it like that. Well, we'll continue. Over here, of course, is the drive list. So here's the drive slots. Now, one of the neat things about the FujiNet is it can emulate a printer and it can emulate a modem. So here's your printer settings. As long as this is active to act as a virtual printer, you can select the printer port as the Atari will see it, and you can select through a list of Atari and other printers, and this is actually selecting the font and the appearance. So what happens is then once you select this, when you go to print, let's say it could be print shop, you could print out any document, or if you had some kind of word processor, it'll actually then save the file as an Adobe Acrobat PDF file, which you could then print off of your modern computer. But we almost consider this as almost like a PDF creator.
Yeah.
And then it goes from there. And then notice that you can actually download the current print that was generated right from this link. So you do not need to set up a TNFS server or any other application on your modern computer, let's say. You can actually grab the print straight from this web interface. Same thing here then with the modem. We can activate this as a virtual modem. That means what you could do is you could then use a terminal program and then connect to one of the web connected BBSs that still exist to this day.
Oh yeah, well, like Amos, Southern
Yes,
Amos,
right.
and Atari BBS. And we have more information on that as well. We'll put some links in the description for that.
Awesome. But here's where you can make sure that that setting is activated. And then if we come down here, we won't bother with some of these others down here, but notice we can even adjust the time zone if we need to. And then we have even a program recorder down here. So I highly encourage you to explore this web interface. This really increases the versatility, because while the FujiNet gives us such modern abilities, we're still limited to the resolution of the display on our 8-bit device. So there are times where it's really useful to come to a web browser, and then you can get into the nitty-gritty for the settings.
Right. Cool. Well, thanks for showing that, Brian. And let's move on to, let's take a look at the Apple FujiNet, and then we'll test that out as well.
Sounds good.
Okay, well, that was great looking at the Atari FujiNet and how it worked. So now tell us about the Apple FujiNet.
Yes.
Apple IIe, no, 2 series FujiNet.
Yes, and really what we say is it's for the Apple II and III, really. But the connections, how we actually connect our FujiNet for Apple to the device changes depending on which model it is. But let's talk about this. With the device itself, the Apple for FujiNet, it's ready, but you need to have SmartPort on your device.
Okay.
So if you have a 2C or a 2C Plus or a 2GS, you're good to go. There's one catch.
Well, some 2Cs...
That's a good point.
Okay.
I know where you're going.
Yeah, need to update the BIOS.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we actually have a test we need to do where we peek a specific address to see if we have a BIOS on the 2C that will support this.
Okay, so, and we'll try that when we go taking a look at it. So if you've got an Apple IIc and you're thinking about getting one of these, you could do the test. Does that work on the 2Es as well?
On the
and 2s?
Well, you actually wouldn't use that because the card connector is going to have that BIOS on it. So on
if you have the right
if
card.
you have the right card.
But will the peek and poke work?
Actually, not sure.
Okay.
But what I find is
I have stumped him.
Yes. Well, I'm not sure, but I can tell you how we can check the version because it'll be printed on the card itself.
Oh, okay.
So on the FujiNet.online website and my website, fvresearch.com, we have a compatibility list. And it'll show you, here's the computers that work natively out of the box. Here's how to peek the address for 2C. And here's the SmartPort cards and the versions of the ROMs you need. And then it'll actually be printed on the ROM at least.
And if somebody doesn't have those, you could go out and find what you need.
And I have links for 2 of them
on
my website too.
Okay. So the Atari FujiNet has just the SIO port, which if you're an Atarian, you understand that part. The Apple world, the Apple 8-bit world, the Apple II world, will this work on an Apple I?
It will not.
Okay.
No, if you can afford one.
Sorry if you have an Apple. Well,
Yes.
I'm not sorry if you have an Apple I. A little jealous on that, but
Yes.
you'll have to grab your Apple II or higher. And this is Apple, but isn't for Apple Macintosh.
No,
Right.
not yet. But
They're working on that.
They are working on
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one as well.
Yes.
So this is just the Apple II line, the 2, the 2 Plus, the 2E, the 2GS.
Right.
And then the Apple III, whatever you want to call that one. If you have the supporting smart disk port, then the Apple FujiNet will work. And as I was saying, the Atari has just the SIO port, but here we have 2 connectors. So you have adapters that come with your...
Right. Exactly. And when you purchase it from me, I include the different ribbon cables that give you options for the connection.
It comes with 3 Ginzu knives?
It is, yes.
Yes.
But wait, there's more. You also get thumb screws, but we don't need to get into that yet.
I forgot about the thumb screws. Cool.
So with the floppy connectors, really what you're using on the Apples, we have the option either of a 20-pin port that's built right onto the circuit board or the little 19-pin. And with the 19-pin, we're back into a world now where this connector does not exist. There is one vintage computer store out there who actually has manufactured a whole new device and pin for his connectors. But for FujiNet, we 3D print parts, and then we're back to soldering pins that are the proper size to work with the DB19.
Now you're back to the same pin problem.
Right.
Matching the proper pin for the right length with the 3D printed part to recreate the DB19 connector, which I'm not sure if you're aware of. The Atari ST line uses a 19-pin DB19 for the the hard disk port, and there's another name for it. And then what was silly is the Atari Falcon, wherever that went, doesn't have that port, but they use the reverse instead of male or female. They use the other one for the DSP output. And I actually asked somebody one time who had a plethora of DB connectors. I'm like, you got any DB19? You can get DB19 connectors online, but they're like $14 each or something. And he's like, I've never heard of that. And I'm like, you'd be surprised.
Yes.
They're used. And then when I got my FujiNet from you, my Apple FujiNet, I was pleasantly surprised with my Apple IIc about the whole DB19. I'm like, somebody else is using it.
Yes.
So there's a little hope that maybe we could get some better supply of these, but you can recreate it with 3D printing and the pins.
Right, exactly right. And so with that adapter, and so for instance, if we were going to connect to a 2C, we would use the little DB19 to 20 connector. It slides right in here, and then that plugs right into the back of the computer.
And that's what we're going to do with your 2C in a few minutes, yeah.
And then we have 2 different length thumb screws so that it could actually mount in place. Now, why would we need 2 different thumb screws?
I was just going to ask.
So if you're working, let's say, with a 2E, you're going to have your card edge connector that's going to have a connection in the back. But you want to have access to your wonderful LED indicators and buttons.
And SD card slot.
Well, that's true. SD card slot, too. So we'll plug in the ribbon cable here. We'll set this ribbon cable aside. And I have 2, of course, so you could even extend them if you needed to. So here you can see this is one example where you could now plug in this connector, and then the FujiNet is a little more accessible, and we could even extend that one more time.
Well, I love the design on here where it's modular, and the Apple II line does have the 2 different connectors available, depending on which system, and they've covered that.
Right.
So you only have to buy the one FujiNet, and you can get the different connectors. Especially, I'm sure. Come on, you with the 18 Apple IIe series in your extra studio, I know you're gonna need those different connectors. And
that's why I follow. What I do is I really follow how mozzwald, who's one of the primary hardware designers, how he sells them on his website. I modeled that, and he made all of these available. And I agree. This is by all these I mean the ribbon cables, the thumb screws, even the DB19 adapter. We do it all at once because invariably you're going to have one of your Apples is going to need these various combinations, and I don't want people to have to fight with figuring out which one they need.
Right, that one day and you can't plug it in.
Right.
Now I want to point out, if you don't mind me saying, obviously you make these and you sell them.
Right.
And I if you want one, go to Brian's check out. There's a FujiNet page.
Yes.
That you can go to and find the list of resellers. Right. And what I want to point out is, even though Brian's here helping with all this and explaining, if you go and you find that list, we'll have a link. If mozzwald is selling them, buy them from mozzwald, because that profit that mozzwald makes, if you could call it profit, goes back into the project. So your profit goes into you manufacturing and upscaling and doing more.
Right.
But the profit to mozzwald goes into buying more cables and parts and doodads to create not only more Apples or whatever, but those other FujiNets that we're not really going to cover, because there's a lot of, it's vaporware at this point, kind of, right? In a nice sense nowadays, not back in the 80s, vaporware was, So we'll have a list where people can buy them from Brian, but of course, check out mozzwald's link. We want to make sure the FujiNet team gets some sales as well, so they can keep making these. Because you don't pass anything. They don't ask the manufacturers.
They do not ask anything. They make all the designs right down to the circuit board, the parts, the firmware, all fully open source, publicly available.
Right.
And so they ask nothing in return but I would say nothing in return. They don't even ask that you do a good job, but I of course take it personally that I want the best product coming out the door that I can provide.
Great. Yeah. So keep that in mind when you go shopping for this. Again, we'll have links in the description here. So the Apple FujiNet, what else about it?
Well, I think one of the other things interesting is the design is far enough along where you notice we have surface mount parts. This is where I know that I feel the hardware design is mature, where they've now moved from through-hole parts, what we might consider a little more off the shelf, down to surface mount parts. And on this one, there's so much going on. They really compacted this. If we notice, it's actually a little bit smaller if we bring in an Atari version. Well, we have a lot more of the little surface mount ICs that they put on both sides of the board to make everything fit in a compact package.
Cool. And then, of course, the micro SD card slots back here.
Yes.
And exactly. I assume that's the spring-loaded one.
It is.
I think they started favoring
Right, the
those.
push in, push out
Right.
type, exactly.
And then USB-C,
Right.
which is for firmware updates.
It is.
And powering it?
You can power it off of the USB-C, and that actually used to be a requirement if you wanted reliable booting to start off of here. But in the most recent version of their firmware, 1.4, they actually were able to significantly speed up the time it takes for a FujiNet to boot.
Okay.
Because if you imagine it's getting power from the computer that you've just powered on, and
Well, it's like, right, in the old days, they're like, turn on your disk drives first, and then turn on the system. And then, of course, it goes click, right, the drive
Yes.
goes. But you technically can't turn this on first when it's just plugged in the computer without power. And the computer boots up and goes, let me check for drives. And this is like still waking up.
Exactly.
So it's the same problem with the Atari 400 and 800 on the for the FujiNets for Atari, in that the 800 boots up faster than the FujiNet. On the later Ataris, the XLs, XEs, they're doing some post stuff, some newer stuff that didn't exist in the original Ataris, and that slowed them down. So there's workarounds, but these are some of the caveats of getting new tech to work with old tech. It works, you just got to know of it.
But it is here. It is, and we do have power ready to go. You'll notice even on the Apple version, they didn't even do a power switch anymore. They took the power switch off. So,
Oh, yeah.
So it's just on as soon as you give it.
Yeah,
power.
I didn't find much use for the power
No, I
switches
just
I
keep them
have.
on, too.
They're either unplug it and don't use it, or plug it in and use it. I have at some time had trouble, and I'd hit the power switch somewhere along the line. I'm like, oh, the thing's not on,
Right.
So, anyways, little problems.
Now, with this, they do not have the Bluetooth LED out of the three. So we have the Wi-Fi connection, and then we have the data being accessed LED, which is usually orange/amber.
Yeah.
One of the things I think is neat with this design, and you start to see how we have influence from the different people who join in projects for a particular platform. With this, you'll notice that with the buttons, the LEDs are farther away from the top of the case. So they actually developed light pipes that are part of the case. And so I have one open for you. So I'll set this here so that we can zoom in on it if need be. But we actually use clear PLA 3D printing filament, insert a small section into the hole, and then we use a soldering iron to melt it into the plastic. So you have indicators that appear to be from the front outside of the case, but they're actually little light pipes that we build in.
Huh. Okay.
So that's part of what I have to do unique when I manufacture the Apple, is after I 3D print the cases, then I need to also then install the light pipes, and then of course I put it all together and test it.
Cool. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and hook this up to your 2C and try it out and see how it works.
All right.
Cool.
So let's go ahead and take a look about hooking up the Apple FujiNet to an Apple IIc. And with the Apple IIc, remember, we want to think about what connectors we need. We would actually then use the bare FujiNet with the DB19 adapter. So we'll plug that in like this, and then we'll insert it right into the floppy interface, which is here in the back. So I'll just pull this back and have it inserted. And this is how the actual FujiNet should look once it's ready to go on a 2C. And we could also connect the two thumb screws if we wanted to have that nice permanent installation. Now that the FujiNet's installed, we'll power up your Apple IIc, and we would expect it to boot right into the FujiNet menu. Now, because we've been testing, the FujiNet actually already connected to Wi-Fi, which I know because I have the white LED. And we end up with our menu here of online hosts, the drives that are connected, and notice we have two sections. We have smart port drives and we have disk 2 drives. So those are ready to go. Now remember that in order to properly use your FujiNet with an Apple computer, it needs to be a smart port compatible. So once we're done with all these menu settings, I'm going to show you how you can check your Apple IIc to make sure it has the proper ROM or BIOS version to support SmartPort. But now that we're here on this host list, before we hop over to the internet and explore, I want to show you how you can check your Wi-Fi settings. Notice on the bottom, we have a set of tooltips, and we have C for config. This should be universal, by the way, across the different FujiNets. So when I hit C, then we have a new menu that shows us the Wi-Fi we've connected to, the name of our FujiNet as far as Wi-Fi is considered, and then an IP address. It's really useful to make a note of this because we can actually go over to a modern computer web browser on the same network and browse to the built-in web server on our FujiNet and then modify and view really lots of settings. We'll take a look at that in a moment. We're not going to change anything here, so I'm just going to take a look down at the bottom tooltips, and I see that by pressing any key, I can come back to this menu. Let's see how we can actually load up a file off the internet. I'm going to use the arrow keys and then hop down to apps.errata.online. Once I move the cursor down to that location, I'll press return to start browsing. Now remember, it's actually loading this folder list right over the internet. We're on an Apple II computer, so once we're on Apple II, I'll press enter or return again.
Now what I'm liking is this menu driven, to me, is the same as the Atari.
Right.
So if I just happen to have an Apple as well, then it's pretty self-explanatory to me. Yeah.
Yeah, and you'll notice slight differences in appearance as far as font or whether or not it's color, but I agree, the folder structure, the way you move around is exactly the same. And I really enjoy how they try to keep the interface as consistent as the platform will allow you to be between them. Now that we're here, we're going to hop over and take a look at FujiNet. So under FujiNet, I'll press enter again, and we have a list of programs. And what we have here is some that have been written by the FujiNet team. We're after this one called ISS. So I'm going to hit a down arrow one more time so that I'm on ISS. And what we need to do is put this file into an actual disk slot. So I'll press return, and that gives us a new menu. We have our smart port drives here, 1 through 4, and then 1 and 2. We're going to go after, or I should say 1 and 2 for the disk 2 drives, but we're after smart port. So in the first slot, I'm going to press return. And then that configures the ISS file itself as a read-only file under that. Now, by pressing return, it should be in that slot. Let's hit the escape key, and from the main menu, I can look at slot 1, and sure enough, on slot 1, it's read-only, that's the R, and then here's the path and the file name, iss.po. So our file's ready to go, and as soon as we reboot, it should load right up into that specific program. Escape to boot, and let's take a look. So remember that now what's happening, the computer's starting and it's literally loading this program over the internet as it brings it into the computer. And this is where the orange activity light's useful on the FujiNet, so you can see that something's happening since we don't have the wonderful drive beep of the Atari.
Well, that's what I was going to say. The Atari SIO port has this inherent audio connection to hear you the bleeps and bloops so that you know things are moving. And back when I had my first Atari with cassette drive, you knew things were loading because you could hear them.
Yes, indeed.
And I don't hear it now. It looks strange. Like, turn up the volume.
I agree, and it's funny how quickly you miss that reassurance. As I went straight to that drive light, I needed to see something happening as I began to wonder. So here we have it. Here's the map of the world with our little International Space Station flying over the ocean here, just off of South America.
Well, it's made some mileage there since the Atari demo.
Yes, it has indeed. It does that. Notice that the ISS menu or display, I should say, for the Apple II, what it does is it gives you the date and time that it considers it as far as it's getting over the internet, and then the latitude and longitude to plot the actual location. Keep in mind how amazing this is. This is actually a JSON parser bringing that JSON data over the internet to then plot the position of the International Space Station.
Right, and for anybody who doesn't know what JSON is, acronym JSON, it's a data set standard that if you have information like XML, you can list it in there And then the FujiNet actually is able to go out to any internet address that it is allowed to publicly or whatever, and grab that data file and then do something with it. So the programmers here grab that JSON file for the ISS and are able now to display it on here.
And so it's nice too then that has been made publicly available for us, so we can do something like this. Yes, good point. And JSON then being a modern standard, that's one of the wonderful examples of a FujiNet device bringing our vintage computer into the modern world.
Right, working with modern data sets over the internet.
Now that we've enjoyed the International Space Station map, we can have this up and running as long as we want. But in order to come back into the FujiNet menu, I find the best way to do it is to power off the computer. And then when you power it back up, we would expect it to boot back into the FujiNet menu itself. So we'll allow FujiNet to boot, and then sure enough, here we are back in our main list of host drives and then smart ports. You can see here, even after powering off and back on, it remembered the FujiNet mounted location here for the ISS file. What if we want to clear that out? Well, what we can do is hit Tab to come down to the drives. Watch out for the edit at the bottom. Right now, the edit choice would be for these host list positions. But in order to get down to the smart ports, I can't arrow to it. I need to hit Tab. And now I'm in the smart port drives. Here I am on the first slot. And by hitting E for eject, I can actually clear that spot out. And so if you remember, that was exactly what it was for the Atari menu as well. So that's why I like how it's keeping that standardization for the menus.
Nice.
Okay. Now I'm going to hit escape, which actually shouldn't have done. With escape, what would happen is it's actually going to try to boot off a floppy. So I guess this is a useful demonstration to show if you don't have any slots and you hit escape, then it's going to try to boot off of a floppy that doesn't exist. And this is the choice, or the actual display that you'll get. So what do? Power off and back on. One last thing that I wanted to show you is how we can view the FujiNet web page that's being generated by the ESP32 right here. So we'll let the Apple fully load back into the internet and then bring up our menu. Here you can see when that white light went bright, that showed us that the Wi-Fi was finished connecting. So from this menu here, notice that you have down at the bottom choice C for config. Config is where we could see the IP address. So by having this IP address, we can go over to then any modern computer that's connected on the same network, and we could browse to the web page. So we'll do that here by going to that address, write in a web browser, and then you just press enter. This is the actual web interface that you get. So this is live information that's coming from the Apple FujiNet right now. We won't go too far detail in all these different sections, but let me give you a little overview. First, you can see here on the left would be the actual network information. So this is the Wi-Fi connection, the name as the Wi-Fi sees it. Over here on the right is hardware information about the actual FujiNet device itself. So it's not the Apple computer, but the FujiNet device itself. So you can see that our detected hardware version is above, I guess, revision 1, I should say. Coming on down, remember how we had the host list and the mount list underneath the FujiNet menu? You can actually see those here as well. So if you wanted to make changes to this host list or to the mounted drives, you can actually do that from this web interface also. Continuing on down, we have our time zone. So if you wanted to set a specific time zone for the FujiNet to remember, we can set that here. And then the last choice we have here is the CPM settings. You can actually use your Apple as a CPM device, and so that's activated here.
Well, I noticed that menu when we were doing the Atari demo a little bit ago.
True. Right.
And we glossed over that, but I didn't know the Apple also did CPM in there too. So it's a CPM computer running in the ESP32 processor on the FujiNet, and now the Atari or the Apple or the other FujiNets, they're just terminals to talk to the CPM machine.
Yes,
but then you could just load and run CPM software. Pretty cool.
Yes, I agree. All right, so that's what we wanted to cover on the Apple. So let's go ahead and get on to the next computer.
Okay, and that's going to be the Coleco.
Yes, the Coleco Adam.
Okay, cool. So we've done Atari and then the Apple FujiNet. And let's go on to the third one, which is
Coleco Adam.
Coleco Adam.
Coleco Adam too.
So we got Atari, Apple, Adam.
Yes.
And then CoCo. Always screws it up, right?
Yes.
3 A's and a C.
Yes. Indeed.
So, but the Coleco Adam.
Right. And so with this one, it's an interesting version because it's not surface mount as far as the parts go. So in other words,
in its design phase, they haven't cut it down.
They haven't
yet.
Compressed it or shrunk it, minimized, miniaturized, whatever we want to call it.
I'm going to cut you off for a second. First off, thank you for watching this video. I know you came here for this or that, and some of you are like, Coleco Adam, what? The game machine? What was it?
Yes.
That's this beast here, which is can you say a full-fledged? It's a full-fledged computer.
Full-fledged computer,
right? But it had a very short life.
It did.
A better life than the Aquarius over here. But you may not have seen it before, but it was a full computer. People were word processing, playing games, of course, and other things. And in the community, well, maybe this is a good time to talk a little bit about this because it applies to this here. Again, mozzwald, mostly hardware, I believe. Thomas Cherry Homes, most of the software side. But Thomas Cherry Homes can't make all this. So the community out there, if you're wondering, why don't I have this on the Texas Instruments yet? It's because you haven't stepped up to work with Thomas and mozzwald to make it happen. You can do that if you want a FujiNet on your TI-99 or Atari ST or, well, the Aquarius perhaps even, right?
Yes.
It's people out in the community. You're in the community making them, but there are people in the community who love their 8-bit computer from their days, that they want this. And so somebody stepped up to make it for like I want it for the ST, but I don't have the time and nobody else stepped up. But somebody stepped up for this.
Right, exactly.
And that's why we have the Coleco Adam FujiNet. So keep that in mind. You can be part of this community helping the FujiNet get onto multiple platforms, which is what they're doing now. They're driving to do that. Okay, so thank you for letting me cut you off.
Of course.
So let's get back into that.
Well, I do want to point out too, and what's wonderful is every time we have new blood, let's say, join into the Discord and start talking about a new platform, we learn something new in the community. And like Thomas Cherry Homes points out, we learn one thing and then that opens up avenues now for many other platforms. And so we branch out and we keep on growing. It almost feels exponentially into new platforms. I actually personally think we're going to see an explosion within a couple of years of a bunch of platforms at once, but we'll see if that pans out if this gets into the recording.
And you end up buying each computer to test. You test every FujiNet.
Exactly. One will not leave my doors without being tested.
Right, which is why
which
was why
I
you
haven't
would
had it.
never otherwise own a Coleco Adam, right?
Well, I still love vintage computers,
Yeah.
so I could see gathering one eventually as part of my collection. But no, it was interesting. Like, well, before I build it, I better find one. And so as Providence happened, I was able to track one down reasonably.
Nice.
And no printer, but fortunately they make aftermarket power supplies now. For
Right.
the Adams.
If you don't know, originally the Coleco Adam was bundled with a printer, and the computer power supply was in the printer. And if the printer had to go out for service, you had no power supply for your computer. It was kind of you can go Google it. It's a funny historical snafu kind of.
I wonder how many people had to buy new desks just to have their Adam computer fit.
On that, yes.
Well, so coming back here, then back to the Adam FujiNet. This one is primarily through-hole parts. So in other words, as you might, when you start soldering, you have individual components that are actually going through. And so I solder these myself. But the one part that is surface mount would be the SD card reader. And so what I do is I have my manufacturer, actually when they make the board, I have them place the SD card and solder it.
Okay.
And if you notice, the pins are quite small, which makes them a little more interesting to solder. So I'd rather this be an automated process for the SD card and then I get the board manufactured, and then I solder everything else.
Well, that's smart because if you did all these, you're more likely to have a cold solder joint or a crossing over or something, and you've eliminated that issue. Because again, you test all these, and you would probably notice some issues.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, that's one of the things I test is to make sure that the SD card reader can actually load up and be recognized. So with this device, then we do have some differences. As always, we have the connection method. How do we connect our Atom? And this one is different. We have it's what's actually called an RJ12 connector, but it's like the good old telephone.
Yeah, I was going to say similar to old phones.
Yeah, but they call it AtomNet. That's their fancy term. And
well, let me say just for like even for myself, I'm unfamiliar with the Coleco Adam, and my first thought would be like, oh, they built a modem for your phone line into the FujiNet to connect it. And that's not what these are. These are not phone jacks at all. Right. These are this would be like the SIO port on the Atari or the smart port on the Apple. This is how it connects to I guess it's smart port over here on the side.
Right.
Yeah, it's data port.
And the intention was for peripherals. So my understanding is that's where the printer connects in addition to power coming in. And it does have a loop through, so to speak. So we can plug in your Atom goes into the end, and then you could continue on to other devices.
So the pass-through, just like the Atari FujiNet.
True, right.
Which, when you were talking about the Apple FujiNet earlier, I was going to mention, I forgot, there was no pass-through because that's not how drives worked on the Apple. You had a separate connector for each individual drive. If you had 4 drives, you had 4 connectors. And so there was no need for a pass-through.
Right.
But for this, there is, and it's built in there.
Yes, that's a good point. Then, of course, we have the SD card reader. We're back to 3 LEDs with this version. So it's Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and then activity. And the buttons also in the firmware aren't always used. A is what we use, and I know you a while ago recorded a tutorial on making the FujiNet firmware updates. And this is where sometimes if you can't get your FujiNet to communicate with the computer to receive an update, holding down A while you plug it in can solve that feature. Okay. But other than that, we don't see a whole lot of activity, I personally, with the buttons being used.
Yeah, usually you plug this in and it goes. You touch the buttons when you're trying to tweak something. But if you got it there, it just boots up and runs.
Yes.
Is there any issue, like on the Ataris, and you mentioned a little on the Apple, where it doesn't boot up fast enough for the computer?
No, since version 1.4 firmware, they fixed how they initialized the file system that the device is using. Once they did that, they actually eliminated a lot that didn't need to be loaded at first. And so across the board, we're finding the production-ready FujiNets, in my experience, when I test them, are booting up fast enough that the computer sees them the first time the computer wants to go and talk.
Cool. And do you have to power this separate?
Oh, no, what's nice is the AtomNet cable actually brings power to the device. So it's this one cable going right into the Atom, and you are done.
Okay, so I believe there are 6 wires in here.
Right.
And this is a crossover cable?
It is technically a crossover cable. So I actually make those to length. We've got the crimper and the connectors so that, and then I test each FujiNet with the cable that I ship so I know.
Right, so you don't have like the test cable.
Exactly.
And then you throw in the made cable. Okay, cool. Right. Well, that's time consuming. So you're not just ordering some boards here and 3D printing a case and slapping them together and throwing it in the box. You're having to put a lot of this hardware on and make these cables, and you test each cable and each adapter, each FujiNet on the actual computers. Right. And that's time consuming. That's manual labor right there. You got to charge for that.
Well, I suppose that's all built into the price, but I do consider it a labor of love too. But that's actually why with each of the FujiNet platforms, I have my own personal bring up where I would focus on one. I started with the Apple and what does it take for me to have these working and looking great out the door? And then once I had that ready, then I had moved to the next one. Actually, then the Atom was next. And Atari, there were more manufacturers out there doing Ataris, so I left that one for later.
Because that was the first FujiNet.
It was.
So people who came on board to make them, everybody was making them. Okay.
Very true. But so anyways, that's been the adventure is determining what's the unique personality of each of the platforms and what needs to be custom done by me that can't be automated. And that's...
Now there's a little, well, let's touch base on that. Correct me if I'm wrong, because you're deeper into it than I am. There is Discord,
Right.
private Discord channels that mozzwald, Cherry Holmes, the FujiNet team. Now, I've met a lot of FujiNet team people. There are dozens because as they branch out, there's an Atari 2600 FujiNet that they've shown at VCF Midwest. That's not in production yet. They don't have that down to a point where you could just easily start making them.
Right.
Because it costs you time and money and parts. You can't just test building 4 of them and then have the design change. You have to order new boards and this and that. But that stuff does exist. You probably, well, maybe Thomas Cherry Holmes will message me and correct me, please. I think you could go make your own Atari 2600 FujiNet device right now if you wanted to buy the parts, source the parts, and make them.
Yes.
Okay.
If we were talking 2600 directly, you would want to reach out to the team on the Discord because they don't have the 2600 hardware as publicly available. I find. Because you want to have this personal conversation to see where things are at.
Right. So that brings us back to those private Discord channels that you're part of because you manufacture these. So you're part of that community now that are trying to work with the hardware. And so the FujiNet team really helps you out by guiding you where to source parts, even what filament that they're not demanding what filament you use, but they're saying, we'll save you the time because you want to make the one that looks like the computer.
Very true.
And they're like, we tested this filament, it works great, go buy that one.
True. Yeah, and I will say too, regarding Discord, as far as I know, there's only one actual private Discord.
Oh, that you can tell us about.
That I could, well, there's only so much I can say on a recording, but that one's called Makers. But I would point out that the majority of the Discord channels are all open to the public. So right now, and I
there's tons of public channels, but the behind the scenes stuff about some of this hardware stuff, because it's fluid, it's changing often, and if they said something in public, it might stick, and they're like, that was temporary. Let's not talk about that one. Just hold off on that.
Yeah, and it ends up being in the Makers. I would say it's nuances of a consideration for production where you're making many that there's no reason to have it on the public Discord, and it might branch off into things where the discussion is not productive, so to speak, if it's happening there. But yes, so one of the things that is interesting is each platform of FujiNet, we try to use a PLA filament, really, a 3D printing filament that is as close as possible to the case color that it's supposed to be. Let's say not as you'll see with my Atari.
Yeah, well,
it could use a retro.
You've got multiple colors going on over here.
I do. And I tried at first to just make a bone white filament. Hey, I'll just keep this loaded in my printer. But understandably, collectors want to have their accessories match the computer.
Right.
So I did have multiple conversations with mozzwald, for instance, where I find out for the Apple II, what's the filament color that we like? And I would go so I purchased those specific filaments to have them matched as closely.
Nice.
And the best example, if I kind of sidetrack back to Atari, for instance, for the XE cases that I now make, the Atari version, the Atari has 3 different case designs.
Right.
Same FujiNet inside, but it's 3 different case. And so that's where I use.
Yeah, the black, darker ones here, the XL line, which is not that. That's XE.
Right.
And then you get to the right here, and the XEs have more of the slanted vents. So there's your XL.
Right.
And there's your XE.
And then we have a 400, 800 as well. The same color as this because it's that good old computer beige.
And it's just aesthetics. I mean, you buy that one, it's not XL specific. It just looks better with the XL. And you can use it on any of the computers.
Very true.
And if you have your own 3D
Ataris.
printer,
right,
you can print whatever you want. That case style and whatever filament color you want. So that's pretty cool. And you can do that on your own without having to make the hardware the FujiNet.
Right, that's true. I've had customers who purchased the FujiNet and they received the case I give them, but then they wanted a different color. And the print files, the STL files, are also publicly available. So you can print whatever color and really whatever material. If you wanted a nylon case, I suppose you could print that if you wanted to.
Nice. So again, Coleco Adam FujiNet, which does all the basics of all the FujiNets. Do they have a standard? Like each one has to do this at least to be considered?
Right. And in fact, Thomas Cherry Holmes has a little article where he said, we want what most users will use the most and have it do those items stably without locking, then your FujiNet design is ready to go public. And
Okay.
I am paraphrasing. But what that means is the core FujiNet hardware needs to be able to boot and stay running. It needs to be able to act like a floppy drive. It needs to be able to access the internet, load off of SD card, and act as a printer. And there's
To PDF.
To PDF, exactly.
Which I thought, when I first saw that with the Atari a few years ago, I thought that was sweet. Because printers are just,
Yes.
there's different ones and the ribbons and it's so mechanical. But if you want to print, you just print to a PDF and it's on the SD card.
Exactly
And
right.
that's across all the FujiNets?
That is, right.
Nice.
Having the ability to emulate a printer is one of the core expectations of a FujiNet platform.
Nice.
And side note, when I first started with the Atari FujiNet, which is the first one that I got my hands on, going in and setting to the Atari printer that I had back in the 80s, and then having that dot matrix appear, that was quite a refreshing nostalgia to experience, to be able to see a printout. All I need to do is, how do I get the tractor feedback on the paper? That's what I haven't figured out yet.
Yeah, nice.
So I think with this, it's good, and we're ready to hook this up and get it going.
Well, let's go ahead and we'll get this hooked up and we'll try it out.
Okay, let's go ahead and connect the Coleco Adam FujiNet. So here we have the FujiNet device. It's plugged with its little cable into the in port, and then the other end of this cable is going behind the power supply to the AdamNet little RJ11 or RJ12 connector. So with the FujiNet connected, of course, make sure that the power switch is on, which is towards the three top buttons. And I'll go ahead and reach behind the power supply, and let's turn the Adam on. So
now you're using a third-party aftermarket modern power supply.
Exactly true.
Instead of the original printer that had the power supply.
Right.
So
Exactly
for
right.
anybody who's got a Coleco, they can go ahead and get that if they
Yes,
want to, and they probably have already. But
right, because it's the power supply for the printer makes it so much more desktop space. And if you even had a printer with your Adam, wherever you found it. So here we have the FujiNet booted up, ready to go. And so we can notice right off the bat, we have a section of host slots. These are, first top spot is the SD card, where we could load files off of the SD card actually on the physical FujiNet. But then we have some web-based locations. We also then have some disk slots here. This is where we would mount the files that we want to load. Now, because we've already been testing this FujiNet, it's already connected to our local Wi-Fi. But I want to show you that down on the bottom, we use the Roman numeral keys to select different menu options. So if I go into option 4, this will actually show us the internet information for our FujiNet. So this would be the name that it's reporting to the Wi-Fi device. This is our local IP address, as well as the other information. This is useful because we can actually access the built-in web server on the FujiNet device from a modern web browser and then view and change a lot of the settings. We'll do that in a moment. Since we're not going to change anything here, now that I've viewed it, I'll just press the escape key once and we'll come back to the main menu. What I want to do is show you how we could go through and actually load and boot a file right into the disk slot, and we're going to load the weather program that's been written by FujiNet team members specifically for the Adam. So I'll use the arrow keys, and we'll come down to this choice number 2, and then I'll press return. And now we're browsing a folder set of shares over the internet right now. We're on an Adam, So I'll press return again. Once we're here, then we have, of course, some other folders, but I'm after the choice called weather.ddp. So I'll come on down here with the arrow key to weather.ddp. And down at the bottom, we have our little cheat sheet, our tooltips on what our different buttons will do. So notice that choice 6 says boot. The nice thing with that is by pressing option button 6, I should say the Roman numeral, it will actually mount the weather.ddp file into the first drive slot and reboot your Adam for you. So let's go ahead and press that once. So I've hit that button 6. It'll flash up. For a moment, we could see that it was the weather app that was actually running, or I should say mounted. Now here we are on a wonderful blank screen, unlike the Atari, which gives us our beeps and bloops to tell us that it's loading information. I can actually look over here on the FujiNet and see that the orange activity light is blinking. So that means we do have traffic going back and forth. So we're going to let the weather program load. This is actually loading the program itself over the internet and then running it on the local computer. Once it runs, then it will gather an initial set of information and then give us the weather. And what it's doing is it's basing the location it shows us off of the IP address that it sees on the public side of the internet connection. So here we are, we're gathering weather data. Any moment now we'll see what it's like here in sunny Southern California. And sure enough, here we have our weather for right now. We're in December 9th.
Well, it's sunny, but a little cold out there.
Yes, it is.
In Fountain Valley, at least.
Right, at least, yes. So that's I guess where your public internet portal must be, at least somewhere close to that.
I see.
Now, you notice we have options, so we could change some of these. We could update our location. But again, this is a program that we just loaded off the internet. And not only is it a program running from the internet, but it is gathering live weather data over the internet on an ongoing basis.
Using that JSON again, right?
I am actually not sure, but it makes sense that it would be, since FujiNet can do the JSON parsing. That makes sense to me that it would be a similar set of data. I guess suffice to say it's a modern protocol, we know for sure, on this 40-some-old computer that's actually bringing in weather from right now. So now that we've actually run our program, we've enjoyed the weather, you could have this up and running on your computer and just, like in the morning, look and check and see what your weather would be like. In order to go back, though, into the FujiNet menu, what we need to do is go ahead and power off the computer. And with my Adam, I notice it likes to be powered off for a good 10 seconds at least before I try to power it back up. So I'm going to give that a moment. And once we power back up, we would expect it to boot back into the actual FujiNet menu. So let's take a look and see how it goes. Once we power it up, then the FujiNet also is booting. And before the 1.4 version of the FujiNet firmware, the Adam would boot faster than the FujiNet did. So we would sometimes have to either power from an external USB or boot the Adam and then reset it again in order to actually have everything boot up clean. But since that latest firmware version, you can power everything off the same. Because remember, the power for the FujiNet right now is coming over the AdamNet cable. Okay, here we are back in the FujiNet menu, and notice that the weather app is still mounted in that first drive slot. If you would like to edit that slot to clear that out, notice from the tooltips on the bottom, we could hit button 5, and then we can edit the host name for slot 1. So I'm going to actually hit the backspace. Aha, notice what we did. I accidentally edited the host slot instead. I'm going to hit escape and we'll see if we can get out of that. If not, what I'll actually do is change it back to SD, since I know the first slot is SD.
Just hit Control Z and undo.
Right, Control Z. I don't know that we get an undo in this one. So then what do we do to actually edit this slot here? Well, let me check down here. Tab from the tooltips tells me that I can actually hop down to my disk slots. Now notice I have a green cursor here. And now I have the option eject, which is option 4. And there we have it. Now our slots are empty. And of course, all of my web-based and SD card slots are up here ready in the host. Now, as I mentioned when we were first coming into the Adam, I wanted to show you how we can access the configuration from the web server. Reminder by viewing, let's actually hit an escape here one more time so that we can go back. Oh, I'm going to tab to the host slots. What I'm doing is I'm looking for the show config option here. So I hit tab again and that brought me back to the host slots. There's my green cursor. I'll hit 4 to show config. And sure enough, here's the local IP address. So as long as I'm on this same local network, I can enter this IP address and view the web server built into the FujiNet. So we'll go ahead and leave that right here. We come over to the computer. Here is the web page or the browser page from the web server built onto the device. So let's take a look at some of the settings that we can view and change from here. Top left is our network information. So this, of course, again, is our IP address, our gateway, etc. Over on the right is the hardware information for the FujiNet itself. So this is not the hardware information for your computer, but rather the FujiNet. So you can see we're working on version 1 of the FujiNet for Adam. Continuing on down, this is the same host list and mount list as you can see from the FujiNet menu, but we can actually make changes to this list from here if we wanted to. As we continue on down, here's your printer settings. So we could actually emulate a printer. And then what happens is when you run your good old-fashioned word processor program on the Adam, you can send it to the printer. The FujiNet will emulate a printer and create a PDF file, which you can actually download straight from here. And you can even choose what kind of printer you want it to emulate. So if you really like the look of the Atari 825, you can emulate that printer. One of the other neat features with the FujiNet is it can emulate a modem. So you can use original vintage terminal software and it will think it's talking to a modem back in the dial-up days, but instead of dialing a phone number, it can go to a web address and actually access an internet connected BBS, just like the old days, like AMI BBS, or there's so many. In fact, there's lots of lists online for BBSs that you can still go to. Now there's lots of other choices to go through. One more I want to share with you would be you can actually adjust your time zone. But I highly encourage you to go through and explore this web configuration page. And remember, all you have to do is hit the config option so you can see your local IP for the FujiNet and then punch that into your browser and you'll get this right off the built-in web server.
Well, I'd like to see if you keep scrolling. Do we have CPM on the Coleco Adam as well?
There is not that being shown here.
Not yet, at least, huh?
Right now, one of the things that is interesting, and I did see this on the other, is we have a check mark that says show experimental features.
Okay.
So if I hit that, and what I think I'll do is I'll hit an F5 just to see. There's nothing changed on the menu. So I don't have any experiment. I don't think anything changed here yet, but that might be, if you're wondering what features may be in the works, you could hit that little checkbox and maybe a CPM.
Well, if you'll indulge me, can you go on the top right and refresh the web page instead of F5? Use the button on the browser?
Sure. So I'll do that there.
Okay, anything else?
Scrolling down, nothing seemed to change. Oh, darn.
CP not.
See, yeah. But maybe we'll keep our eye on that, see if maybe it will show up someday.
Well, we got to find somebody to work on it.
Well, maybe they are, and they just haven't added it to the list yet.
True.
All right. Awesome. So that's what I wanted to cover for this device. Let's move on to our next computer.
Sounds good, and that's going to be the CoCo. Let's take a look at the CoCo. Okay, cool. Well, we've got through the Atari, the Apple, and the Adam.
Yes.
I like the 3 A's.
Right.
And now we're on to the CoCo.
Now we're on the CoCo.
So for the Tandy TRS-80 model, not the Model 1.
Yes, actually,
if it has enough memory.
All 3 CoCos.
Okay.
Right.
So this works on CoCo 1, the color computer. For you CoCo guys and gals, you know CoCo. For everybody else who's checking out the other FujiNets and wants to know about FujiNets and computers you don't have or don't have yet, there's the color computer, which is now Color Computer 1. There's the Color Computer 2 and the Color Computer 3.
Right.
And they have different memories, capabilities were pretty much the same. They added some stuff, of course, as time went on. But all the CoCo FujiNets, they all work through right now, the cartridge port.
Right.
Like regular, all the peripherals, your disk drives and stuff that you had for your CoCo, and plugs into the serial port in order to load software.
Right.
Okay, so go ahead and
Exactly.
tell us more
yes,
about
indeed. Yeah. So this would be our first example. One of the things we're pointing out is how do you connect each of the FujiNets. So with the CoCo Fuji or FujiNet for CoCo, whichever way we want to refer it, it plugs into the cartridge port for the CoCo. But at the time of the development where we are now, it needed to have a serial connection in order to actually load the files. So what happens is if we switch over here to one with the case off, you'll notice that we still have our ESP32 that's doing all the FujiNet tasks, but we actually have an EEPROM. So this is running an HDB DOS, which is a CoCo DOS. And it actually has 3 different versions depending on a CoCo 1, 2, or 3. So when you boot your CoCo with the cartridge installed, it actually loads the DOS off of this EEPROM and then launches the FujiNet interface that we know and love, first thing asking you for a Wi-Fi and going from there.
Okay, nice.
But if you don't have the cassette or serial cable connected, when you try to load a file, it's not going to find it because it's coming over this right now. So this is the current version. And by the way, the CoCo FujiNet is a good example where we're very, very close to being considered production ready. When you look at the FujiNet Flasher, which lets you load up your FujiNet firmware onto the
For the
ESP,
different FujiNets.
for the different ones, you only see now 4 different platforms available there. And the CoCo is the newest edition. So that tells us that we're getting very, very close to production ready. Where we're actually at right now is they're working on a revision for the hardware that will eliminate the cassette cable.
Nice.
And it would be just cartridge. But we're not there yet. So I manufactured a series that use both so that we can get somewhere out there and get more, really more exposure for the community.
Well, that's something I wanted to bring up for you as the producer, manufacturer, maker, right? Getting these in people's hands. For example, the Atari is pretty well mature, and I think you mentioned like you buy those boards with some of the service mount parts. You get them in batches of like 50 or something,
right.
which of course brings your cost down. You don't want to do that with this because it's still design changes are happening.
Exactly.
So if you got 50 of these boards to lay this out, and you've sold 18 and design changes happen,
Yes. Right.
now you got to sell somebody an older FujiNet.
Right,
You don't want to do that.
Right.
So going from the Atari to the Apple to the Coleco, now we're to the CoCo,
Yes.
where this one's a little bit more. I don't want to say it not stable, but there's going to be changes.
right.
So somebody could buy this from you today, if you have it in stock,
Right.
but it's going to change.
Exactly.
And you don't know yet when.
No, we don't know it. And because really everyone in the FujiNet community are volunteering their time. Definitely back to that term of labor of love. And so they're doing this when they have a chance. So we never know how long it will take.
To get that
to
eureka
get that-
moment
exactly.
where they're like, now we're doing it this way.
Or really if they know what to do but don't have the time to implement yet.
Right.
And I would say actually with the CoCo version, I find it to be stable as it is now. But one of the things as when we're building and developing and being makers, we look at something and think, you know what, I can do this better. And that's one of the situations where we're really thinking it'd be wonderful to eliminate this pigtail. Not to mention, I do hand solder these boards. In fact, from my circuit board manufacturer, I have them install the capacitor and then the SD card. Those are the 2 surface mount parts. Everything else I hand solder, but then I also hand make this cable. There is a process under the GitHub where the designs are shared that show you how you could Frankenstein some other cables, cut them and splice them together.
Yeah.
But I make my own JST connector, crimp the ends, and then hand solder the dip, the socket. And what that means is that's then time consuming. So I personally be very happy to eliminate this cable so I don't have to make them anymore.
Right, and I would have to imagine the software would load faster through the cartridge port,
I think so.
obviously, right? So part of what I like about this is you're actually using, I asked you about this, the external antenna, but inside the case, because, the CoCo's right here. Let's see if I drop your CoCo. I forgot the power cord.
Survived shipping from eBay, so hopefully.
Yeah. So there's back in the 80s, man, there was so much shielding concerns, and of course this is pumping out so much RF noise that they wanted the devices, because this is a cartridge port. So like for an Atari guy, you might be like, it's a cartridge port, you plug the game in. Well, this is actually where the color computers had, you plugged in your disk drives and your sound modules and other things, and they had expansion off of this. So this did a lot of high data rate, which causes more interference, and so that needed to be shielded. And so this cartridge, as big as this looks, just disappears halfway, right?
Right.
Like, where are we on this thing?
Yes.
Yeah, about half of the cartridge is gone, and your antenna is now inside the computer. So this black pad right here is the antenna.
Right.
If you've seen those little, if you get close, you'll see the squiggly wires for the antenna part. Well, that's now buried inside the computer, right?
Yes.
And so you actually, that's another design issue where you had to add an extra part.
Exactly.
Not you, the FujiNet team, when
Yes.
they're designing this, had to add the external antenna on there. So every FujiNet's got its own little things going on.
Design considerations.
Okay, cool.
One of the neat features, though, we brought this up earlier, but this is a design consideration that we're now thinking about. Okay, well, we want the 2600 to have that's going to be cartridge port. Other devices like the Intellivision will be cartridge. So we're wondering what's going to be the best way for antenna placement, so we have good Wi-Fi coverage. So
because you might just say, well, then turn this board around and put the antenna on the outside, but then you've got the USB connector and the SD card slot.
Right.
Because in this design of a FujiNet, this ESP32 card has the USB connector and the SD card slot already on it.
Right.
And so the orientation that needs to be outside the machine, which then puts the antenna inside the machine.
Yes.
So,
And one of I know I don't want to get us into the weeds too much, but
please do.
Okay, all right. Well, eventually we would expect that the ESP32, this of course is a development board that gives you all the other support for that. So we could put that into a breadboard and be running this. But the expectation is we install just the ESP32 onto a custom design board, and then we can orient all the connectors wherever we want them to be.
So we've got a couple design changes that are most likely to happen with the CoCo FujiNet, or FujiNet for CoCo.
Yes.
Is getting the antenna toward the outside and the connectors toward the outside, and eliminating the pigtail.
Right, exactly.
So there's a lot of changes that happen in this one.
That we're expecting, right?
Okay. So you can buy these now. I think as of today, you might be out of stock.
I'm out of stock at the moment, but for any of my FujiNets, while my goal is to always have them in stock, I have a wait list feature. So you could go right now to my website and say, oh, the CoCo is not in stock at the moment, but definitely join my wait list, because then the moment I update that stock ticker, which means I have them ready to go, then you'll have an email.
Okay, cool. But if you had them, people have to know that they're buying this design iteration.
Exactly.
Which is, if you want it now, early adopter, right? Go ahead and get one, play with it. It's worth doing, but they are going to make changes down the road. You know, this isn't, like Microsoft has it perfect until you hear about it.
Perfect.
Right? And then it comes out and that's what it is. This is, better than homebrew. This is a big community working on this. But changes happen. I've got 2 or 3 iterations of Atari FujiNet myself. They all work, but design changes have happened.
Yes, indeed.
Well, anything more on this before we check it out?
Well, one thing I do want to point out is it does have 2 little dip switches here, and that's how we set the version of the CoCo that we're using. So you set with those combinations if it's a 1, 2, or 3, and that actually sets the address So you load the proper version of DOS when the cartridge boots. But
Okay.
then it takes care of everything else internally. So you definitely want to double check the dip switches before you connect it. Mine's ready for CoCo too, since that's what we're going to test it
Okay.
with.
Well, there's 3 CoCos and 4 switch settings.
Yes.
What happens on the 4th one?
A diagnostic ROM. So,
Okay. So I was trying to catch you. You'd be like, nothing happens on the 4th one. So, wow. Okay, so there's a diagnostic.
Yes. So
Sweet.
the actual CoCo diagnostic is available now.
Oh, the one that CoCo,
they
that
make-
Tandy had out there. Oh, sweet. Okay.
You do need to catch. There's a boot jumper that you do have to bridge in order to start that up. So
on this board?
on this board, there's 2 little pins that need to, if I remember correctly, it's been a while because I use other methods to test the cartridge to make sure it's working. But the idea is you make an electrical connection across 2 points on the board, and then it will start off of the diagnostic ROM when the cartridge boots.
Cool.
But it's rare that we do that. Ordinarily, I want to get to playing my CoCo games, so
Right.
I have it booting.
But if somebody did have trouble with, say, their serial port, something was wrong with their computer,
Right.
they could test it that way.
Yep.
And then
Diagnostic
determine it's not the
problems.
FujiNet, it's the serial port.
Yes, very true.
Oh, well, that's pretty cool. Okay, well, let's get this hooked
Yes.
up and we'll try it out.
Sounds good. So let's go ahead and hook up the FujiNet for CoCo. So with the cartridge, we first want to make sure that the dip switches are set correctly. This is a Tandy Color Computer 2, so I have dip switch 1 is in its off position, and then 2 is up. And we have a little chart online at fvresearch.com and fujinet.online, so you can see the settings. So we'll plug in the cartridge as always, and of course I'm going to make sure to turn the FujiNet doesn't have power until I plug it in. I'm going to turn off power to the CoCo too. So I'll plug in the cartridge, and then after the cartridge is in, then we need to remember to hook up the pigtail, because so far the serial pigtail is still part of the picture. So I'll hook that up like that. Now that the serial's plugged in, cartridge is in, we'll power up the Tandy Color Computer 2. Because this has the built-in BIOS, it will actually load HDB-DOS and then go into the FujiNet config screen. Now, because we were testing earlier, Wi-Fi is already connected, and we can actually see the Wi-Fi connections by choosing C for config. I'll hit C, and here you can see we have the IP address that's been assigned to this computer. This will be handy because I'm going to show you later how we can actually view the full configuration for the FujiNet and even make changes from a web browser on a modern computer. So from this point, I'm going to hit break to back up to our main host slots list. What I want to do is show you how we can load up a computer program off of the internet and then actually reboot our computer and run it from there. First choice is the SD card. So if you had files loaded on your SD card, you could actually bring them right off with a local physical card. But I'm going to use the arrow key, and I'm going to come down to tnfs.fujinet.online. This is one of the online servers that's available with files for us to load. So I've pressed enter, and then looks like this is not actually going to be the one for us to use. Notice there's nothing here for CoCo, at least as far as these folders are listed. So I'm going to hit break to come back here, and I'll go down to the second choice, apps.errata.online, and I'll press enter. And now from here in the list of systems, we do have one for CoCo. So we'll hit the down arrow to CoCo, and I'll press enter. And then we're going to go down to the folder for FujiNet. So down arrows, FujiNet, and press enter. And here are some programs that have been written by actual FujiNet team members. We're going to go after the ISS map, which will go online and actually plot us a chart showing us where the International Space Station is currently located. I'm going to hit the down arrow twice, so I'm on iss.dsk. And then we notice from the choices down here, what we would do then next is hit enter. When I hit enter on that folder, then it's ready to actually put the disk itself, the disk image, into one of the drive slots. Now this is sitting here already because I was testing this, but notice from the choices on the bottom, by pressing enter, then that would give us read-only mounting of this, which is all we need. We would not want to even really try to write over any data which would be a W for read write. On this spot, I'll go ahead and press enter. And now that I've pressed enter, I'll hit break so that I can come back to my host slots. Now, if I actually reboot now, then the ISS disk will be mounted. But on the CoCo, it is a little bit different. So far, if you've watched all of our other mountings of drive letters or mounting of drive images, we would tell the FujiNet to reboot the whole computer and it would automatically load the program. Currently, you need to actually load the program itself from a prompt, from the basic prompt. So I'm going to hit break so that we drop out to the DOS prompt, or DOS so much as really basic, isn't it? Here we are with basic, so we actually need to run this file. Now, if I were to do a dir, then it's actually reading a disk. As far as the CoCo is concerned, it is looking at a floppy disk right now. And we can see that this program is iss.bin. Since it's a bin file, that means it's machine language. So I can run it by using the command run and then M for machine language, open quote, which I know it's hard to see on the screen, and then just ISS. I actually don't even need a close quote. By typing all that in, I'll press enter, and it is now loading that disk image for ISS and that bin file over the internet from the TNFS server and then bringing it up on this computer. So now here we have the International Space Station map, or I should say here's the world map, and where's our space station? Well, kind of like Pac-Man going from one side to the other, here it is on the right and left sides of the screen. So
let me look out the window.
Yeah, can you see it up there?
It's a little dark out, a little cloudy.
Probably you might need binoculars to see it that far away. But notice on the bottom it's displaying the date and the latitude and longitude. And I do believe the date is based on universal time, so that's why it's already 1 in the morning on December 10th. So now that we've seen how we can load up a program and we could enjoy the International Space Station map, when we're finished with that, then the next thing to do, really, I find, to come back into the FujiNet menu would be to power off the computer and then power it back on. By doing so, it will boot back into the main FujiNet menu. So once that finishes, it'll bring us back into the list of host slots. So we could go and browse to some other files if we wanted to load up anything else. But what I'd like to do now is show you that web browser interface that I pointed out to you earlier. Well, by hitting C for config, we can see the IP address for the local computer. So any other modern computer with a web browser on the same local network can actually access the web server that's built right onto the cartridge on the, well, really on any of the FujiNet devices. So coming over to the web browser on my modern computer, let's say, I could just put that IP address right into the computer, and this web page now is coming from the web server on the FujiNet. I won't go into super detail on the options here, but let's take a look at some of the main options. First, up here on the left, you have the network information. This shows you the Wi-Fi information that the FujiNet is using. Over here on the right is hardware information for the actual FujiNet device. So this isn't hardware for your CoCo computer, it's hardware for the actual cartridge. And since we are in pre-release still, you notice it's listed here as Rev 0. Coming on down, we have the host list and the mount list for drives. These are the exact same ones that we see when we're on the FujiNet menu. And notice you can edit this, and here we can see that we have the ISS disk mounted right here. You could even eject that disk from here to take it out of that slot. So it refreshed the screen and now all the slots are empty. If we continue on down, the FujiNets are designed to emulate a printer, so you could have a word processor running on your CoCo, let's say, and you could print to that printer as if you had a good old-fashioned 1980s printer connected. But instead, FujiNet will intercept that print and actually create a PDF file, an Adobe Acrobat file, that we could then download from here and then print on our modern computer. You can even choose between a set of different printers to choose what you would like the appearance of your printout to look like. Now, you can also use terminal programs. Your terminal, as far as it's concerned, will think it's talking to a modem, but instead you're actually connected to a internet-based BBS, and there's lots out there. So you can check online for a list for those, but Ami's BBS is a
Right,
is
and we'll
one
have a
that's
list
good.
in the description down here.
Oh, awesome.
Right.
Okay, and then last one I would point out to you is we also have the time zone. So if you wanted to set your time zone for a real-time clock.
Well, I'd like to look at the printer options again.
All right.
Because we keep seeing Atari listed.
Yes.
Because, they coded everything. But if you scroll through, I think you see some Epsons somewhere, do you?
Let's scroll down here. We have an Epson
there you
80.
go.
Yeah,
Epson
good old
80s and
Epson
so,
80.
yeah. So it supports
those.
if your CoCo software needed an Epson printer, it's in that list there.
Yes, good. It's going to need to be one that your CoCo would have, that would understand how to talk to. So that's a good point.
The Occam 810.
Yes. Looking through these printers is just another walk down memory lane.
And then you know what I want to know now? Is there a CPM in there?
Let's scroll, and so far
we
I
don't
do
see
not
that
see
one.
it. Now, they do have a separate CPM disk that's available under the share for one of the TNFS servers.
Oh,
So you could actually go in and bring up CPM that way.
okay.
They just haven't added it to this menu yet. And I wonder if we click on this, show experimental, I'll go ahead and do a refresh, but so far I haven't seen anything else come up here. And so nothing else new on this list. If you remember, some of the other FujiNet web browser screens showed options for CPM, but we do not have any here yet. And remember, with the CoCo, this one still is in pre-release.
Right.
And so it'll be interesting to see if it has a CPM as part of this web browser settings.
Right. Whoever did CPM for the Atari, which was probably Thomas Cherryholmes, somebody different may have done it for the Apple that we saw earlier in the video here. And these other FujiNet platforms, if you don't see it, then step up, and if you have time and the inclination, you can make it work with the team and extend the functionality of these.
Yes, and the best way to step up is go to fujinet.online, and you'll see a link there for their Discord server for FujiNet, and you can hit them up for whatever platforms you have interest in.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so that takes care of it for the Tandy Color Computer 2.
Well, cool. Well, let's get back over here and wrap things up.
Sounds good.
Well, that brings us to, at this point, the fifth available FujiNet. Now, you don't, let's say it's for the Commodore. This is the Meatloaf project, FujiNet project. They've combined, if you know Jamie, who handles the Meatloaf project, and then Thomas Cherryholmes works with Jamie for the FujiNet side. At least that's my understanding. You don't make these yet because there really isn't a production version, right?
Right.
So as much as the Atari is pretty solid, the Apple is solid,
Right.
and I should say the Atari is solid. And
Yes.
Apple's solid. The Adam CoCo, to me, seems pretty solid in its design. They're going to make it maybe more surface mount, make it better. Maybe not. It does what it does. The CoCo FujiNet, well, not quite solid yet. And the code works, the hardware works. But there's going to be, they know that they're going to have design changes. So there's going to be a hardware changes for the CoCo.
Right.
But you can make them now as it is, and then you'll make them when they make the changes.
Yes.
So getting to, as far as I'm aware, the fifth FujiNet that you can get your hands on is the Meatloaf / FujiNet.
Right. Yeah.
Meatloaf FujiNet.
I guess, yeah, or be
And-
a FujiNet for Commodore.
Right. So you're not making these.
I'm not, but I do have them on my website, so you can join a wait list. So
Okay,
that
good.
when I feel that we're getting close, at least, that's when I'll start to ramp up production and then make them available. So I want them in the hands of users, but it's a matter of the investment of time and money to do
Right.
it. So we can join the wait list now, but yes.
So this is like the not ready for prime time players.
Not quite yet.
Yeah, like SNL. So I have a video making this Meatloaf FujiNets. I'll put a link somewhere. There's other videos if you check out Seth Parsons' Citizen video. He's got one on that for the Meatloaf FujiNet. You can make these. You just need this, Jesus, if I can say it, sorry, $4 ESP32 development board. You get it in various places. solder on 4 wires. It goes to the serial port on the Commodore, and it'll boot up. It'll do FujiNet, not quite the same, not as easy, at least to me, as the other ones, which are menu driven at this point. The 4 we've looked at, you boot up and you get a menu.
Exactly.
This, you got to do command line stuff, which you can do. It works. So if you've got Commodore and you want a FujiNet for it, you can do it, but you're pretty much going to have to. Have you seen anybody selling these?
I have not seen anyone sell it. It's fairly straightforward, at least as long as you can solder, like you showed, your 4 connectors.
Right, just solder on those wires. And even what's interesting is if you go watch Citizen's version of making this meatloaf FujiNet, some of his wires go onto different pins. And by the time I made my video, they had changed the design of that to use different pins. And then they're actually talking about making this work in the cartridge port or the user port on the Commodore.
Either one, right. I'm not sure which direction that they're going, but that's the hope, is get it on the bus.
Right.
If they could do that, then we're going to really improve the speed.
So I wanted to bring this one up because it is available to make. Heck, I've got one. I'm using it. So I wanted this to cover all the available FujiNets in whatever iteration, full production, some production changes happening in the future in the CoCo, and as far as I'm aware, lots of production changes on this one. But get your early adopters, go ahead and get these boards, and I'll have links again in the description here where you can get parts and whatever. But there's not much more to say on that. This is actually the development board from Lowland. This just comes in the mail wherever you order, you get it from. We're not soldering on any of this stuff. This is all on the development board for, again, I don't know, $7 for the development board or whatever. That's an amazing thing you and I were talking about. I love this stuff, man. So you just solder on the 4 wires and firmware flash it with USB on your regular modern computer. And you've got a FujiNet online for your Commodore. And you can connect, I believe the game lobby? The game lobby works with the Commodore, right?
I have not seen that yet, but that makes sense. The game lobby for FujiNet, which is where, what's amazing is for an Atari user could play with a Commodore user, could play with an Apple, and that game lobby is where we all meet up.
Yeah,
so, and
I plan on doing like a live thing in the coming weeks. Well, the holidays are here, right? So coming weeks means next year. So, which we're not that far from.
No, we're not.
This year is almost over. So I was going to do some live stream playing the Atari FujiNet game lobby. I want to get online and play with some people. And part of the problem is people aren't online at the same time. You go into the lobby and there's nobody there at that particular time. And I want to try to corral the community together and let's get 5 or 10 or 20 or 50 of us. I don't, maybe we'll kill we'll kill the lobby at that point. But we'll get a bunch of us on. Let's go ahead and play some games. But you go ahead and get this made if you don't have one yet. So I wanted to cover that for the Commodore, and I'm very much looking forward to. I'm sure I'll do another video when they have the next iteration. And I'll get that going.
Yes.
But we'll go ahead and we'll plug this in, and we'll just boot up some command lines. You can see where you can get a directory off the SD. You can connect over the Wi-Fi. So I'll touch base on that a little bit, and then we'll wrap things up. Okay, well, let's go ahead and we'll give Brian a break from doing all the demonstrations here. I've got the FujiNet Meatloaf pre-production device I've made here. And we've got the Commodore 64 booted up. And of course, this will work on a Commodore 64, a C128. It's made for the Commodore 8-bit line. And what we can do is, you see I have an SD card here, a micro SD card. We're going to go ahead and load the directory from device 8, just like there's a disk drive attached. Boom. There we go. It's loaded in. This is what is on the firmware right now on here, as well as the SD card directory up here, which is for the SD card. So let's go ahead and load SD, and FujiNet will go into that directory and load that. And we can see I have, well,
Gore-Tex and the microchips and a couple versions of Qbert on here. And we could load one of those if we wanted. What I'd like to do though, let's load something over the internet. So I've already set up the Wi-Fi on here, the SSID and the password. We're connected to the internet. You don't see it here yet. But if we go ahead and load $device 8, the firmware will say, let's go out to the internet. It's searching for it. It found it. It is loading a remote directory off the internet into the FujiNet device here. And we can list that. And you can see these are all the directories and such off that remote server. Let's go ahead and list again. And if you hold the control key, it'll step through each line. And we're going to take a look at the arcade directory here, because everybody loves games. Let's see, arcade device 8. It's now searching, finding, loading that directory off the remote server. Not even sure where this server is. It could be in Georgia. We're in California here. And if we list that, here's programs in that directory. And what I'm going to go for, because it's a pretty good version, is this Pac-Man here. So we're going to load Pac-Man device 8. It found it, and now it is loading the software code off the remote server from Wi-Fi to here to the network router here over our internet connection to somewhere in the world, downloading the program into the Commodore 64's memory. Now, while we're waiting for that, I will mention, I think I said solder 4 wires. It's 6 wires in here. Simple enough. This is the Lowland development board. And maybe I said $4. It might be $7. But, you know, $10, $12 in parts. And you have your Commodore 64 on the internet. They will make the spec better for the FujiNet and come out with production versions of these. But for now, if you're an early adopter, if you've got some soldering skills, you got a buddy with some soldering skills, go ahead and get these parts. I'll put a list in the description for a video I did for finding the stuff and making this. Now, let's see, Pac-Man is done loading. That wasn't too long over the internet. We can list it, but it's not a basic program. So we're just going to run. And after a bit of this, we got boom. Well, there we go. I was off a little second. Pac-Man. We've got Pac-Man running on the Commodore here. It's local in the memory, but not anywhere else. There's no cartridge. There's no disk drive. And I actually like this version of Pac-Man. Of course, way better than the Atari VCS or Atari 2600 original version. The screen does slide up and down, but I can appreciate that in order to get that full... Oh no, it faked me out. Oh, okay. Give me a second. Oh no, I'm messing it up. I'm not going to get any of them. Wow, that was terrible. Whoa. Okay, well, well, there we have it. So there's a quick demonstration of the non-production yet FujiNets for Commodore. So check it out and game over. Go ahead and check this out. It's pretty fun to play with, even if it's not a full production version yet, and they will get there. Well, Brian, thank you for coming today. Brian, you're, I don't know, less than an hour away.
Oh, it varies. This is Southern California.
Well, it worked out for me because you're here. And
Yes.
I'm like, I want to get Brian here. He's got the Coleco and all the FujiNets here. So thank you for he's been here all day. This is, whatever the video length is, we've been here all day. It's been great playing with all these. And you've got, again, to highlight, the Atari 8-bit FujiNets,
Yes.
the AppleIIe series FujiNet, the CoCo 123 FujiNet,
Yes.
the Coleco Adam FujiNets, not the Commodore Meatloaf
Not
FujiNet yet because not far enough in production. But this sounds like a hard sell. Go buy them. Go buy them from mozzwald. Buy them from whoever you want. Brian's got them. I actually bought. I don't get any of this stuff. I actually paid Brian for the. I have an Apple FujiNet right here. This is my Apple FujiNet, and already this design changed. So you're selling a slight different design of the connector. It all works the same,
Right.
but just to show that you're keeping up with the hardware changes. So you've got these in stock,
Yes.
and you also have a newsletter that people can stay in touch
Yes,
with.
indeed. In fact, it's actually through a Substack. So if you go to fujinews.substack.com, then you can subscribe. So what I do is I try to make valuable content for the FujiNet community. So when the FujiNet team posts one of their rapid updates, I send out to my email list. But when I find a collection of great podcasts or YouTube videos, then I also provide that as a list. And then I give a stock update on how we're doing with all the FujiNets.
Well, hopefully you'll list this great FujiNet.
I think I will. This will be a pretty good video to
Well,
list.
let us know how this turned out. Again, what did we start with like 9 hours ago?
Yes.
Whatever, it's been a long day. So you've got the newsletter, and also I'm going to plug the VCF SoCal, Vintage Computer Festival SoCal here in Orange, California, where me, the Vitnerd, and Mrs. Vitnerd are based. Mickey is the showrunner, and it's about 2 months from this date. Thomas Cherryholmes is going to be there with showing the FujiNets. Hopefully some of the other FujiNet team, if they can
That'd be
make
great
it.
if they could. Yes.
You're going to be there.
Absolutely.
Well, actually, Brian's doing double duty at the show. You're selling FujiNets.
Yes.
You're going to ramp up production and have a whole bunch there.
plan.
And you're also doing a soldering station for
Yes,
us.
indeed.
So our first show last year, we didn't have a soldering station area. You stepped up because you sell other kits.
Right.
Oh, okay. We'll just plug this
Yeah,
really
in
quick.
fact, I designed a kit specifically for the upcoming show.
Yeah, it's hard to see this, but VCF SoCal badge kit, learn to solder kit. I'll do a separate video on this, but you designed this and you sell this on your website.
Yes. Those will be exclusively for sale at the show.
Oh, okay.
And then overstock
Sorry.
would be available after. But I do have other solder badges and kits for soldering from beginner all the way up to advanced.
Because that's
whatever your level.
what FutureVision Research really was doing before FujiNets.
Exactly right. And so we're still doing that. And that's designing those kits and developing all that helped prepare me for what I'm doing with the FujiNets now too.
Nice, nice. So please go check out Brian's website of fvresearch.com, and let us know what you think. If you've got any comments, if you've got these, maybe some questions on these, go ahead and shoot comments in there. I'm sure you're going to check out the video and respond to people.
Right. I'll keep my
And anything else, let us know. Appreciate you watching, and catch you soon, and hopefully at VCF SoCal. Ciao.